Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about how to have a conversation with someone you disagree with and what sort of principles you should employ and how you should basically approach that conversation and to make sure that it is civil and actually productive with as little dishonesty as possible. The inspiration for this video came after I watched a video by another objectivist on YouTube named Analyze This. He got into some uh, discussions or debates under my under my videos and comment sections, and then he made a video where he started talking about different principles to follow when you're having a conversation with somebody and how to make a conversation productive and how to basically have a good debate where each side is talking in good faith and it makes it so that the conversation is actually productive. And one thing that I think he mentioned in that video was you want to basically employ the principle of basically charitability. I don't remember the specific word he used, but charitability, be as charitable as possible to their argument while still taking it literally. So charitability subsumed under this broader principle of literality, because literality basically being that you interpret what they say as what they say. You give their words their actual meaning. If somebody says something, you take it as 100% of what they say is actually what they're saying. You take something literally. That's the basis for communication, basically, as he explains in the video. And then charitability is basically just giving them the most true possible interpretation of what they're saying. So you take it as literally true, and the things that might seem a little vague, you basically go in and assume that they have the best intentions. Assume that what they're saying is true. Or assume that they're making the statement or assume that by using those words, they're pointing at something true, rather than assuming immediately by a certain phrase that they're pointing at this terrible idea that's going to completely destroy Western civilization, and that's really easy to knock down. That's called strawmanning somebody. And if you want to have a good discussion, you want to employ charitability. You want to be as charitable as possible to the other person. You basically, when you listen to their argument, hear what they're saying, and then there's always going to be a little bit of vagueness because you can't say everything in your mind at once. You can't provide an infinite amount of context that comes around the principles you're employing. So there's going to be a little bit left up for interpretation. And now if you're an objectivist like me, I would basically assume, not necessarily assume that they're being an objectivist with their statement, but basically give those little vague pieces of their argument the best possible interpretation, or interpret their statement as strongly in as positive a light as possible, in as true of a light as possible. So like if someone who is also an objectivist mentions this mentions the spiritual values that you get from something, I'm not going to immediately assume that, they said spiritual, that means they believe in some mystical higher power spirit sort of, and include all these bizarre conclusions that Christians have. And even just like a regular person, someone who you don't know if they're religious or not. Now, if they're religious, obviously you might want to push back on the use of the word spiritual and see what they actually mean by that. But just a normal person who's just not religious, or if they don't understand the context. Actually, this might not be a good example, but I hope it gives an idea of what I'm trying to talk about. Basically, you want to, when somebody says something that might be a little bit vague, when somebody says something that might not be formulated perfectly, or they don't provide the perfect amount of context, you want to interpret that charitably. And you can basically ask them, but this is the best way to go about them. Is this what you mean by this specific thing? Or what do you mean by this? And then they can go into more detail and give more context and make it so that less stuff is vague, and make it so that you can be more charitable and more literal with their actual argument. Now, instead, what a lot of people like to do is they take this little bit of vagueness and they fill in that vagueness with as much bullshit as possible, and basically build up this new straw man that they can easily knock down. And this leads to very dishonest conversations. It leads to the sort of things that happen when I discuss stuff with groypers. In the comment sections today of my Nick Fuentes video from way back in the day, I basically said that Aristotle's political philosophy was very underdeveloped. It wasn't that I'm not a big fan of it because it's just very boring. I read Aristotle's Politics. There's not really much in there. And yes, then this person saw earlier in the comment thread, I said, Aristotle is the basis for what's good in Western civilization. And he's like, oh, but you said Aristotle's philosophy is underdeveloped. See, this is an example of someone being extremely dishonest and not being charitable when thinking about what I'm actually, when thinking about what I'm saying. This person's actually dropping literality too when he is making this straw man. So he's not, when he's forming up this straw man. So this isn't the perfect example, but it's an example of not actually interpreting what somebody means and dropping context around what they're saying. If I say Aristotle's philosophy is undeveloped, I'm talking about his political philosophy. That's the context of what the statement is basically saying, of what my statements are saying. Now, let's say I don't include political philosophy, but I'm talking about politics, and I say Aristotle's philosophy on this matter is undeveloped. Now, this person could interpret this in the worst way possible and think that I'm saying all of Aristotle's philosophy is underdeveloped, which is what this Groyper basically did in the comment section. No, this is the wrong way to think about things. This is not how you have a civil debate. You give them, basically assume the best intentions. You always assume the best intentions because usually that's what people think they have. People think they have the best intentions, and you should treat them accordingly. Now, if someone's being obviously dishonest, you point out that dishonesty and stop talking to them. If it's not in your best interest anymore to discuss with them, you obviously have to drop the conversation. But if they're being honest, if they seem to be an honest actor, and they say something that might be a little misstated, don't jump on that misstatement. Jump on what they're actually trying to say, or what you assume they're actually trying to say. Be charitable with it too. Be charitable in your assumptions. Don't assume that somebody's saying something super extreme and super out there. Assume that they're saying something that's closest, that the closest to truth interpretation that you can think of. Don't assume that they're making absolutely absurd claims, because I don't think most people are trying to do that. Now, some people do have terrible claims, but you want to interpret things charitably whenever possible. Obviously, you still need to be literal about it. If someone is literally saying something, you don't use charitability to perverse what they're actually saying. You want to be charitable still, but you don't use that charitability to talk to someone who's saying, who explicitly says consciousness is more important than, or consciousness is more important than reality, or consciousness can control reality. Don't interpret that to be meaning something other than what it's meaning. They literally said consciousness comes before reality. That's primacy of consciousness. Then you go from there. You say, no, you're wrong here. You interpret it literally. You don't be extra charitable to the point where it is not literal anymore. Like if you heard that statement and said like, oh, this person thinks consciousness is more important than reality. Well, I mean, we are conscious and we're pretty important. I don't know how you could twist that. I really have no idea how you could twist that. That was just, I don't know. I don't know how you could necessarily twist that into being a good thing. Maybe you can come up with something off the top of your head, but I can't. Not the best extemporaneous speaker here, even though that's pretty much my job. But hey, it's all good. If you want to have a civil discussion, if you want to have a good discussion, though, you want to be charitable with things. And the best way to be charitable with things is basically ask them directly. Like, oh, I feel a little vagueness here. Do you mean this or do you mean this? And then they can basically explain, oh, I mean this. Okay, and then you go from there and argue from there. And yeah, always interpret them literally primarily. And then wherever it's vagueness, try to be as charitable as possible and ask for clarification whenever possible. And Analyze This does a really good job. Analyze This does a really good job in his video of explaining these principles, how they interact. Probably better than me, but I kind of wanted to get this system of thought out there because he's kind of a much smaller YouTuber. He's a much smaller YouTuber, and I think that these are some important principles that one should follow. And I just want to get that principle out there. And once again, the main purpose of this channel is to practice talking. It's not to give you guys my completely original ideas. No, it's to practice explaining the ideas that I hold. And that's not necessarily going to be something super original every time. Now, I hope I had a few insights here. I don't know, maybe I could talk about some experience that I've had with that, which I did with the Groypers. Another example would be when I was talking with Patrick Casey, and he basically was not being charitable at all to my positions and called me a neoliberal, a libertarian, a bunch of names like that multiple times throughout the video. And that was not the case. It's definitely not the case. He tried to fit me in these sort of boxes that he assumes that everyone's in, and wasn't actually being charitable to the things I was arguing about. And it made for a really bad debate because I couldn't actually get very deep into my philosophical beliefs, and he never really got that deep past his talking points. None of us, yeah, we never got anywhere in that debate. And yeah, the purpose of debating, the purpose of discussing ideas should be to gain philosophical insight. It should be to better understand my ideas, for one, and better understand the ideas of the other person who's talking. And if that other person has something good to offer me, something more true than what I have, I want to hear that. I want to hear more truth. I could be wrong. That's very possible. I don't think I'm wrong. I'm pretty certain that objectivism is true. But there might be little mistakes that I'm making. There might be little problems that I have, and discussion helps sort those problems out. I might be holding a principle out of context, and I need to get context to that. Or I might have an understanding of a different philosophy that's completely wrong, and I want to better understand that. And you're not going to get anywhere by not being charitable with your opponent. You want to be charitable, while still taking them literally, because I mean, you have to take things literally in conversation. If you don't actually take something literally when you're talking to somebody, that I think most people understand that principle. You don't look for an implied meaning rather than what they actually said. Look at what they actually said, and if there's vagueness, you are as charitable as possible to it. That's the key. I think that's the main point of this video. You want to be charitable when you're talking with somebody. Always assume the best intentions until somebody obviously is completely dishonest, throws out some completely dishonest point. That's when you just end the conversation, because you're not gaining value out of that. Unless, of course, you're debating somebody who is way more popular than you and will gain you followers. That's when you keep the conversation going. Like when I debated Patrick Casey, I could have easily dropped the call, and I don't know. I wanted to get exposure to these ideas, so that's why I did that debate, and also just to practice my skills for in the future when I have, so that I can be better in debates in the future. But yeah. I mean, go watch analyze this. Go watch his video. Go watch his video. Go subscribe to his channel. There's a lot of good stuff on there. He seems to know a decent amount about debating, which is, I should have a conversation with him sometime. I don't know where I can find him. If you're watching this right now, which you might be, because I'm making a video about a principle you talked about, and yeah, you might be watching this, but yeah, if you're watching this, send me your email, or I don't know, message me on Twitter or something. I don't know what specifically you have. But yeah, I think that's all I have to say for today. So thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next video. Peace.